effort doesn't always equate to results in dating. In fact, most of the time it doesn't. So after years and years of the apps, I just was so exasperated and I felt kind of crazy actually, because I was like, I feel like what I want is out there, but every date I go on feels so far from it that it just makes me feel like I'm a crazy person.
Hi, and welcome back to the Turning 30 podcast, a place where we talk about what it's really like to turn 30. I'm your host, life coach Emma Wilson, and I'm here to help you feel better, get unstuck, and be more confident in your 30s. And this week, we finally have another guest episode. I have invited a guest who ran a dating workshop in the Turning community. And as I was listening to the workshop, I was like, oh, I love her take on dating. I love the way that she articulates so many things about being in your single chapter and looking for love. And also her story to finding love is one that will really expand your mind and you do not want to miss. So I knew I had to invite her on. Just to remind those of you who are not already inside the Turning community, this is your place to be for working on your single chapter. And as you're going to hear in the episode, me and Lauren, we speak a lot about the struggles that you have during this time. And these are all things that we work on together in a group. There are over 100 women inside of Turning, and you don't have to walk this chapter alone. So let me introduce Lauren to you. Lauren is a long-time dater turned dating author, turned dating and relationship coach. Lauren was dating for 10 years and she went on over 200 dates in her 20s and 30s. And this led her to writing about modern dating in her book and talking all about the struggles that modern daters deal with today, especially in relation to the dating apps. Her first book was called Looking for Something Serious, and from when she published this book, she then found a deeper passion in sharing practical and optimistic dating advice to help single women build confidence, patience, and the hope that they need to not give up on finding love. Lauren is 36. She lives in the Bay Area in California with her husband, who she met on Reddit, which is something that we dive right into at the start of the episode, because I just love the fact that she met her husband on Reddit. And it's such a reminder that you can really meet someone in any situation, in any place. So let's dive into this week's episode. Hi, Lauren. I'm so happy to finally get to talk to you on the podcast.
Yes, thank you, Emma. Thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
So many things to dive into. I feel like firstly, our audiences are very aligned, single women in their 30s who are looking for something serious. And I love your story. I feel like it's such an important story for people who have been single for a long time and who feel like giving up have to hear it, which is obviously why I invited you on, and also to talk about the dating landscape right now and giving some tips to the listeners for how they can get themselves back out there if they are looking for something serious. But before I ask the generic question of, tell me your story, can we talk about the fact that you met your husband on Reddit? Because I feel like that is a very important part of the story.
It is an important part. Like every time I still love telling it, and it's like the punchline of all dating story punchlines of, yeah, just meeting someone on Reddit after using the dating apps unsuccessfully for years. And it's just like, I could tell the whole story in a minute, but it really, to me, is the ultimate indication that you never know how or where it's going to happen. And like life can really surprise you. Like I wasn't on Reddit looking for love or anything.
So that was going to be my next question. It was like, had you been on other dates from Reddit? Was it something, because I use Reddit sometimes here and there, just to, if I want to check like a review of something, or I don't know. For me, it's like it's a very random platform. And when I heard your story, I was like, am I missing out? Like, is this something that I didn't know, that people go onto Reddit? Because, you hear stories as well. I also recently heard somebody met their partner on Threads. And
love that.
I know. And then I thought, ooh, is this something we should be looking more into? So was it something that, had you connected with people there before? Was that something expected in any way? Or was it just as random as it sounds?
It was pretty unexpected. I will say that I spent a lot of time on this subreddit called Dating Over 30. So it was a place for people over 30 to kind of talk about their dating stories, their dating woes, like commiserate with each other. So I had posted on there many times for, when I'd get love bombed or things would be super confusing. So definitely I wasn't expecting that it would lead to like, first of all, someone I know near me, but second of all, going on a date and having it actually work. I did go on one date from Reddit like many years prior with a guy who I think he was on the dating over subreddit as well. And we realized we lived in the Bay Area, California, and he messaged me and we went out and it just like wasn't a match. There was one other time, but it was like so few and far between that the time I met my husband, I was just like I was in a funk. I was like, I'm not gonna meet anyone.
Wow. I love it. I just love that because obviously one of the stories I get asked the most, and I'm sure you do too. One of the questions, sorry, is where can I meet somebody that isn't on the dating app? So I feel like I love showcasing stories that aren't the norm. So yeah, why don't we just dive in and you can share a little bit about, I guess what we want to hear is from the start of how you felt
Hmm.
about being single before and where you were in your dating and your single chapter, and then obviously leading into the Reddit date.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give some background on me and who I am, I was always one of those people that wanted love really badly. And, it was hard to ignore. One of those urges that just tended to take me over. And so I don't think I was necessarily desperate, but I think that dating and relationships are always a really top priority for me. So I was an early adopter of dating apps because like I lived in San Francisco at the time. So when all the apps came out, like Hinge, Tinder, Bumble, all those, I was on them and used them a lot. So from I think they came out in like 2015, all the way since then I was using them and I would go on a ton of dates because I heard the whole thing. It's a numbers game. It's a numbers game. And so I figured that's the way to do it. And I'm kind of like a planner type of person. So I was like, well, if I just plan enough dates, love will happen for me, right? But as most of your followers know, it's just not how it works. Like effort doesn't always equate to results in dating. In fact, most of the time it doesn't. So after years and years of the apps, I just was so exasperated and I felt kind of crazy actually because I was like, I feel like what I want is out there, but every date I go on feels so far from it that it just makes me feel like I'm a crazy person. And it just like I got, all the things like ghosted, breadcrumb, just rejected over and over, all the things that happen when you're dating. And I think that's what's so hard about the apps is they just really hurt your morale. Like even if you are a pretty confident person, like I've seen myself and others go on the apps and just like get their confidence ruined over time. And so that's kind of what started to happen. So I'd go on and off them. Like I probably quit and restarted 5 or 6 times over the course of years. Every time I was like, it's going to be better this time. I'm more confident. I know what I want. Of course, it was never really different. And so I hit a breaking point at the end of 2021. I was dating a guy from Tinder. Never a good idea, but he was, really complimentary, whatever. We really got along. We had chemistry. I later learned he was totally love bombing me. So it was a very like up and down situation. And I just felt so ridiculous. I was 32 at the time and I was remember just like crying on the floor during the holidays because he was being super hot and cold and I couldn't figure out like when we were going to see each other and it was just making me so anxious. And I remember my sisters and mom were like, you got to get off those apps, like they are so bad for your health. I was like, you know what, you guys are right, like I feel actually done with them this time. This is a rock bottom moment for me. So at that point, I quit them, ended things with the Tinder guy. It was like really close to January 1st. So I also do a sober January every year. So it kind of coincided nicely. I was like, let's start off the year fresh. And so I was off the apps for several months. And like come March, I was feeling Really good. I was like, wow, like the apps were really taking a toll on my mental health, and as was alcohol. So like both of them were really helpful for me to kind of live without for a while and notice how much easier it was to feel emotionally regulated and have self-worth and all of that. And some kind of kismet things were happening to me during that time. Like I was meeting some guys out in the wild, but they kind of felt like little tests from the universe because I would like meet them, but then they wouldn't follow through on the plans. And I was like, no, I'm not doing this. And also during that time, some old dating app matches started to like randomly pop up out of nowhere. Again, like more universe funny
Mm.
things. And for some reason, like all the ones that popped up, like chose that time to inappropriately overshare to me about stuff. Like it was just really weird. Like they three different guys just like one of them went into like this overly sexual thing and it just got real weird. And so that pattern, I was like, what the heck? So I went to my favorite place, Reddit, the Dating Over 30 subreddit, and I posted about this thing. I called it the oversharing phenomenon. And I was like, what is this? Why are people oversharing to me? Like, this is so strange. And I guess it is a common occurrence because my thread got really popular and lots of comment, lots of discourse. And so my now husband was one of the people who commented on the thread. And he just said something about like, the importance of healthy boundaries. And he had experienced oversharing like from a woman. And he was like, oh, like it was uncomfortable. And I was like, oh, cool. And I think I commented back and maybe he replied once. And then I didn't really think anything else more of it. And then maybe like a half a day later, like that evening, he said he felt this inexplicable urge to DM me. And so he's like not the DMing type at all. He barely has social media, but he's like, I just feel like I need to talk to her. And so he sent me a DM and was just like, hey, I really liked what you had to say. I liked the way that you wrote. I hope, like, I wish you well in your dating life. And I was like, wow, like what a nice, unassuming message. And so I replied, and Reddit has no profile pictures, by the way, like no personal information. So you don't know anything about these people that are talking to you. And we started talking, and we realized that we both lived in the Bay Area about 10, 12 minutes from each other. We were like, oh my gosh, like what are the chances?
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. And after a few more messages, he asked me out for coffee and he was like, I have a sister. I don't want to be creepy. You just seem cool. And I was like, you know what? Like this feels so serendipitous that I'm just going to say yes and go. And yeah, like our first date was lovely and it was just so unexpected and then it just went from there.
Wow. That is so funny, isn't it? Because I always think whenever I hear love stories, and as you know, probably from following me on Instagram and all my followers, I run a series called Love After 35, which is where I share stories of women who met their partners later than expected. And there's always these like magical moments, these almost like nudges from the universe, which are, for
Hmm.
example, the fact that your now husband had this like inexplicable urge to message you, to DM you, even though he'd never DM'd anybody before on Reddit. Like, who even knew you could DM on Reddit? So there's always this, almost like moment of something happened that wasn't normal. Something happened that was almost like a divine control. Do you believe that? Is that something that you connect to and hearing stories about love?
Absolutely, yes. And I think that was such an important part of my story personally because as I had mentioned before, like I'm such a planner and a controller and I'm like I want to be able to plan out how love is going to happen for me. And I actually had kind of gotten some spiritual guidance myself that was like it's going to happen in a way that you can't plan for. And like of course as a planner I'm like what do you mean? Like my eyes are always open, always scanning. You're not going to surprise me. And it's just so interesting how it's like there always is some kind of magical thing, it feels like. And it's like, of course, that, I hate that, like, you'll find it when you least expect it, but it really was something about kind of like taking my hands off the wheel a little bit and trusting that it could happen that I felt like really helped me.
And that's what I wanted to unpack now and talk a little bit about, because obviously you summarized very eloquently all of the, kind of the trials and tribulations that you'd gone through in the run up and all the little things that had led you to being on that Reddit post and sharing about the oversharing. But what was it during that time that changed the way that you were, I guess, viewing being single, viewing finding love? I know this is a bit of a leading question because I've listened to your workshop inside of the turning community that you did. It was amazing. But yeah, I think the listeners would really benefit to hear the changes that you made and the shift that you went through when you were in your single chapter before you found love.
Yeah, I think it can really be boiled down to shifting from external guidance to internal guidance because I think I had spent so much time looking outside of myself and like wanting other people and the world around me to tell me the answers of like how I was going to find love and what I was doing wrong and all of those things. And I went years and years without any real answers and it led to a lot of the confusion I was talking about. And so I read this really influential book called Meet Your Soul, and it was about connecting to that really deep part of yourself, like the wise one or your soul or whatever you want to call it, your intuition. And I learned how to really start to hear that inner voice in my own guidance of why things are happening, what I should do, those types of things. And so spent a lot of time in like meditating, journaling, and kind of just like writing down things. And it really shifted my mindset from just like forcing and waiting and trying for it to happen to more of this like kind of trusting mindset of like this is happening in the right timing. It's taking a long time because you're asking for something really special. It's being prepared for you. He's not ready yet, but he will be soon. It was just like the guidance that I received was it made so much more sense to me than any of the stuff that I would hear outside of myself. And that really grounded me and allowed me to maybe be more open to things, to the way things could happen to me and the timing in which they would happen, because like clearly it wasn't happening on the timing I wanted, which was like getting married at 25. So I think just yeah, just really shifting to that kind of intuitive type of guidance, which did include quitting dating apps and alcohol. That was a part of it, was like finally listening to those nudges and all, other little nudges along the way. And it just felt so much more aligned. Like I felt like I was living very authentically and soul led versus just doing what I thought I had to do to find love.
And I want to ask you a question because I think this is something that has come up before in the community and maybe something that also I had a lived experience with. But did you ever feel frustration during that time that you had to do all of this work in order to meet somebody? Because I think that it's something that sometimes single women who can look around and compare themselves to, for example, maybe a sibling or a best friend or a colleague who met their partner and got married in their 20s, or maybe their, high school sweetheart, or just it was all like quote unquote easy for them. And then there can be this almost friction of, well, now I have to do all this work on myself. Well, why do I have to journal every day? And this person met their soulmate without doing anything. I'd love your take on that because I think that it is something that is not often spoken about, but that single women can often experience almost a bitterness that they have to do this extra work.
Yeah, absolutely. I really felt that, especially as like the longer that I was single, the more I started to feel that. Because I think there's kind of this misconception that, when you work on yourself, like that will help you find a partner. And that doesn't always lead to a partner, when you want it to. And it's really frustrating when you're sitting here, like going to therapy and journaling and doing EMDR and all the things. And then you see your friends or colleagues or whatever not doing anything and they just like fall into these relationships and you just wonder like why me, like why was this my path that, that I'm on. It's super frustrating, and I think a large portion of my single journey, like maybe toward in the middle of it, was those feelings of frustration and like a lot of unfairness as well. And I think the truth is that sometimes it is unfair. Like some people just open Bumble once, swipe right, and find their husband. Like my best friend actually did that. And it was like so heartbreaking and hard for me to watch her just like get married. And I'm sitting here struggling on the apps. It was really hard. And so I definitely want to validate any single women that feel that way because I think it is a reality that we just have to deal with. And, we could go the route of saying like, oh, not all those relationships are happy, or maybe they want less than you, or maybe they're less evolved than you. But I also think there's just a part of it that's luck and timing, and it's kind of something that
Mhm.
we have to live with. But yeah, the self-work thing is definitely a balance, because I think it can get to a point where you start kind of seeing the personal growth as like the reason that you haven't found love yet. You're like, oh, if I just do this one more personal growth thing, like that's what's going to lead to love. And it can kind of put you on this never ending treadmill of feeling like you have to like keep working on yourself. And I don't think that
Mm.
that's good either.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's like finding the balance between doing the things. And I do think that if you are single in your 30s and you've been dating and it's not going the way that you want it, there is a lot of benefits to doing this work. Because, like, and this is exactly what happened with you, you're going to uncover so many things about yourself. You're going to probably have realizations and understandings and healing that you wouldn't have if you hadn't have been gifted the single time, and also will change all different areas of your life, not just your relationship. It's your relationship with yourself. And I think what's, I love about your story as well is this the sobriety part of it, the fact that it led you to quit alcohol, and then that also had like such an impact on obviously all different areas of your life. So yes, there is that, but I do really agree that sometimes there is that feeling of, if I just do a little bit more, then love will come in. And like you very rightly said previously, this is what we need to understand about finding love, is that there's not really a correlation between effort and out and like, and receiving back. So you can do so much and still not find love. Or you could do very little, or everything in
Hmm.
between. So yeah, I think that's really important. And something that came up for me when you were speaking actually is that sometimes we go on like a spiritual journey, or we try to go onto this a spiritual journey to find love just because we want the love, and we like disconnect from actually the meaningfulness of it. Like sometimes I think that happens. I'll say to clients, okay, like you need to turn the volume up on you, this chapter we're going to go and like do all of these amazing things, and it feels like they're just doing it. And I say this is the collective, we're doing it
Hmm.
just to find love, instead of actually doing it for what it is, which is to learn, to evolve, to grow, to enjoy life, to, all of those other things. And that's when I think that sometimes it doesn't work, because we're doing it because we think if we just do a little bit more, then this will happen. If I just go to this event or start this hobby or do this course, then that will bring love. But we need to do it because we actually want to do it, because, and it's not to do with finding love, it's to do with us and our authentic self. Do you resonate with that? Because I feel like that is something that's also very prevalent with my community.
Yeah, deeply. I was nodding with you the whole time because I kind of laughing at myself. I will admit, when I first started my personal growth journey, like I was fully doing it because I wanted to find love. It was very results oriented because I'm a results oriented person. And I think that's not to like assign meaning to why I was single for so long, but just looking at how I shifted over time of doing personal growth for the reason of finding love. And I think I was single long enough that at one point it flipped around, and it's like I started to actually care about this work that I was doing with myself and the changes that it was making in my life. Things like listening to your intuition, like so incredibly important for everything outside of love too. And things like learning how to listen to your body and care for your body, and like, which is what finally made me stop drinking. And things like trusting the process, like that applies so much more broadly than just in love. And like that was such a critical learning for me, and I still use that today, even things with career, or finding a good house or apartment. It's that same thing, because I was able to take that time and like practice, sometimes against my will, but eventually not against my will. For love, it taught me those really important skills that I now have, and I'm like, wow, looking back, I'm super grateful that I went through that journey, and that it was as long as it was. It was just the right amount of time.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing. So, your journey, obviously, a big feature in it was getting off the apps, and you spoke a little bit already about how you feel about the apps. Do you recommend that people don't go on the apps now? Like, I know that was been, a feature for you was quitting them. Is that what you recommend for all single women in their 30s to do?
I don't necessarily. I take a middle of the road approach for the apps that's very based on the person and their experience, because in some senses I do think they are just a tool to meet people, but they also have kind of vice-like qualities in the sense that they can be hard to use in emotionally healthy ways. They can be kind of addicting, like all of those things. And so I think it's like it's weird to compare it to a substance, but to me, it almost has that quality to me of like you need to use it carefully and with boundaries, and not when you're feeling bad about yourself. And I also do give people, say, if you hate the apps and all they ever do is make you feel terrible and you dread going on them, I do think it's important to let people know that you can quit and it's absolutely possible to find love without them. It really is just based on like what you feel in your soul is right for you. And if you have to quit them and restart 5 times to figure that out, that's okay too.
Yeah, I agree about the middle of the road theory when it comes to apps. I think that it doesn't need to be so extreme. I like to say they're just a tool to meet someone. And I completely agree with you that if it's causing you more pain than it is benefit, then what's the point? And I think you actually alluded to something very, very important about the mindset. Like if the apps make you feel a certain way because of the way you think about them, then it's useless. There's no point going into something. And I actually think that's true with all dating in general. If you have beliefs that are negative and they're very overwhelming, then that is how you will approach dating. So, and again, it is hard, isn't it? Because it's unfair, because I think a lot of women who are looking for something serious in their 30s are very likely to have negative feelings about the apps and about dating in general. So it's not an absolute thing to say, but definitely I think it's important to acknowledge that there are times when it's good just to say no more apps for now. Just like have a break, have a little interval with them, and then see if you can go and change your mindset and go out and meet people in the wild. I actually shared something that you posted the other day on Instagram that I thought was addressing such an interesting topic, and I absolutely loved the way you approached it and spoke about it. So I would love to hear your take on this in words. And it's about this feeling, or this, let's call it a belief, that women have that they are the ones doing all the work. Women are obviously historically more in touch with their emotions, and they're doing this. Links obviously back very well to what we've been talking about now, of when you're in the single chapter, becoming more involved in healing and journaling and therapy and courses and coaching and all of these things. And that belief that comes up that men aren't matching women's efforts when it comes to finding love. And that, I guess, a belief that I held for many years, which was that men are just not emotionally intelligent. Men are not emotionally mature enough for me to find somebody to have a deep relationship with. So can you share a little bit about what you posted and your take on it, so we can dive into that topic, because it's what you wrote was brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. It's a hard topic to write on. It's so nuanced, but I do think, there is some truth to the fact that women tend to be more in tune with their emotions. Like women go to therapy more often. That's like in statistics. So I think that when women are saying, men, I'm not finding a man who can measure up to me. I understand where that comes from, and I also felt and experienced that when I was single. And the kind of optimistic take that I was getting at in my post is that we're really in this interesting time where there's a huge shift in what women find attractive and want in partners. Because even as recently as, I don't know, 30 years ago, it was more things that were focused on like a man being a provider. So it was like his career, his stability, his status, those types of things. And now you're seeing that so many women are more focused on like emotional intelligence and soft skills. And, is this man doing his personal growth work? Like, is he going to therapy and addressing his childhood wounds? And that is just such a monumental shift in what women are looking for. And so I think that's why we're like kind of in this growing pain right now, where it's like women's expectations of emotions are here and men are kind of still, some of them are still kind of down here. And it's like we're in this time where it's like men are learning, oh, like, okay, this is what women want. This is what's attractive to women. And I think it's just a natural, like, social evolution that is happening where, women will find something attractive and eventually men will have to catch up to that if they want to be with women. And so I think that it is maybe more optimistic than people realize, and that it's like women are kind of leading the way on a lot of that emotional work, and some men are catching up. And of course, some are lagging and some don't want to do the work and all that type of stuff. But, I think meeting my husband showed me that it's like there are guys out there that it can take a little time. And also, there are guys who are willing to learn. Like you might meet them maybe a little bit imperfect, like maybe they have never gone to therapy or whatever when you meet them, but then as you start dating, they're open-minded, they're willing to grow and change with you. And I think that that really is only getting more common as we go on. So I personally am hopeful for how things are shifting in that way.
Yeah, I just love it because I think it's a really important conversation. And I really agree. I think that what you spoke about with openness, I think is the most important, because I can say that, I was in a long-term relationship in my early 30s with a person who was closed to therapy, who was very like judgmental about
Mm.
doing this. And it's hard, isn't it? Because we want to say, oh, this person, you want to say bad things about people who are like this. But at the end of the day, we sometimes forget that men have been socialized, and the generation above us are really an example of how extreme this can be. But they've been socialized not to be in touch with their emotions, not to cry. They've been taught because of their gender that they shouldn't have to think about these kinds of things. And yeah, so we need to actually look at this with a little bit of grace and compassion for men, because a lot of them have been brought up by male father figures that tell them explicitly not to be emotional or not to have these conversations, or they've followed how they've grown up. So I think that the most important is that there is a man who at least can admit, okay, maybe this is something that is new to me or that I never have explored before, but I'm willing and open to have those conversations. So I think that women also need to cut men a little bit of slack when it comes to it, because like you mentioned, we're women, we're emotionally a lot more in touch with ourselves because we also have been socialized to be that way. And there are lots of men out there who have already gone onto the other side of this hill. And I do really think that, and my husband is a perfect example. And he's somebody who had done therapy and was really into meditation and mindfulness and yoga. And even actually, he was just as evolved as me when it came that way. And I held this extremely strong belief before I met him that men weren't able to have the depth of conversations, and I was only ever going to have that with my close friends, and then a man would he would have a different role in my life. And it has been extremely healing and also extremely eye-opening to know that this was just a limiting belief, because there are men out there who are open but also who are into it, really.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought that part up about not like blaming men for this, because I think that's where the conversation can go sideways and really get into gender worry topics, is be like, men suck, men are trash. And it's like they're under the same harmful systems that we are under, right? These like patriarchal things that put men in one bucket and women in the other. And so I think that's an really important thing to highlight, is like, yes, there are some bad men, but like for the most part, I think that, like your husband, like my husband, like there are good men out there really trying. And I agree about cutting men some slack. Like even talking to my former self, like I had such this rigid view of how I thought men were. And even when I met my husband and he like didn't quite do things in the way that I wanted him to do, I saw how rigid I was in my mindset. And I was like, geez, like it's just like really polarizing. I think dating can really put us in these like very opposite camps when we do have a lot more in common than we think. And I think like, you sometimes you do have to meet a guy that gives you hope and makes you believe in that men's ability to grow. But I agree with you. Like it's a limiting belief to say like there are none.
And what would you say for a single woman who is listening to this, who wants to meet men who are more open, who are more in touch maybe with their emotions and are kind of in this world, let's call, doing these more evolved activities? How can they open themselves up to meeting somebody like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that really you can meet someone anywhere, as we've discussed, but I think that being intentional about the types of activities you're doing is important. Like, I think that, I used to like go to the bar and think I was going to meet a guy there. And it's like, why would that happen? So I think kind of doing things where the type of people that you would want to date would be at. So, like a Saturday morning co-ed sports or volunteering or, working at a coffee shop or anywhere that you feel like the type of people would be that you want to be. But I also think that like there are no limits to where you can meet people. Like you can meet someone in the grocery store and it really comes down to like kind of how you show up and vet the people that you date. And I'm a huge proponent of like really like, showing your cards and saying that you want a serious relationship and really like asking them to step up early because it's like if they're kind of like hemming and hawing around commitment or all those things that we kind of get scared about scaring men away. It's like actually you're going to scare away the ones that aren't emotionally available and probably attract the ones that are.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm such a huge advocate for just putting cards on the table. And if it makes somebody run for the hills, okay, goodbye. Like, you weren't welcome here in the first place. I feel like that obviously can be very confronting for women who maybe struggle to get dates or, like somebody and then they feel that connection. And then they say, oh, I'm just going to wait a little bit to tell them what I'm looking for because maybe they will already fall for me if I just wait a little bit longer. And I actually disagree with the waiting and the hoping that it's going to pan out. I think that it's something to be spoken about, not necessarily on the first date, but within the first few dates. It should be,
Hmm.
what are you looking for something serious?
I totally agree. And I think even in my own experience going on hundreds of dates, any time that I felt like I had to hide my intentions or like play the cool girl, it never worked. And any time that I just was able to show my interest and that they also were interested, it was just so straightforward. And there was no need to hide intentions or pretend like you were interested less than you were. And I think there is kind of truth to saying like, if you're confused, like, or if you feel like you're having to put on a persona, like that's probably not a good sign because like it does tend to be straightforward and easy when both people are emotionally available and interested.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would love to hear, after you had been single for quite a few years before you met your husband, how did you find those early stages of dating? How did you find the transition going from searching for love to then, I don't say finding love, because I'm sure I don't know, maybe you could share, but obviously then a relationship comes and then the relationship is its own container that has to be nurtured. I would love to hear how that shift went for you.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I think because the context in which I met him was right after I had been love bombed, and I was just kind of in this state where I was like, I want slow burn. And so it was very interesting just watching myself, like, though the first few dates were good, it felt almost like anticlimactic of just like, oh yeah, I like this guy. But compared to the several other times when I had been love bombed, it was not super exciting or super sparky and chemistry and amazing. It was just like calm and pleasant and I enjoyed talking to him. And so that was kind of surprising to me because you always hear like, oh, when you know, you know. And I didn't feel that. Like I didn't know on the first date or the second or the third. After you date for that long, I think it's only natural to kind of put a guard up maybe or maybe just want to use more discernment before you fall for someone. And so I think went into it very kind of grounded and I was like, well, we'll see. Like I was very much in observer mode and collecting data. And then I kept noticing like how calm I felt and how secure I felt. And I'm normally, while I was dating, I was usually kind of anxiously attached and I was not anxious at all with him. And it was such a strange feeling to me after all the ups and downs of dating that I got to the point where I started to wonder if I was bored. And I was like, well, I don't know, like, do I like this? Because there's no worry, like there was no chase. Like he was just very straightforward about his interest. I always knew when I was going to see him again because he was really good at planning. And so it did this like the inverse of what I expected, where I started to question like, well, do I want this? It's almost too easy. And I started to get a little bit avoidant, which was literally the last thing I expected. So there was some of working through that for me in maybe the first few months. And it was definitely humbling and confronting and took a lot of journaling to work through because I could see with the facts that I had what I'd been asking for in front of me. But then I felt this like strange avoidant pull, and I was able to eventually tease out that it's like, okay, no, this is not a real problem. This is like a, whatever we call it, sort of emotional avoidance type of problem. And I actually communicated to him about it, which was also very weird to do. I was like, hey, kind of feeling avoidant, but he could feel it. So I think it was good to bring it up. And speaking about it really kind of took the charge out of it and made it feel less shameful and secretive. So I was just like, I'm feeling avoidant today. Sorry, I'm working on it. And it passed, after a couple months, that feeling passed. And then it really moved into that feeling of like warm, calm, secure. And I was like, wow, okay, I have something really good here.
I was just grinning the whole time that you were sharing because word for word, this is exactly how I felt when Ellie and I started our relationship, especially because we've been friends before. And it was, in my mind, I was certain, based on all of my past long-term relationships, that it was going to be, you meet them, you feel the butterflies in your stomach, you feel the spark, and, there was going to be this like electricity, and then that was going to be it. And it's so funny because I feel like now in dating, especially on social media, it's said time and time again, no, the calm feeling, the security, all of those things are actually what you should be looking for. But when you are single and you are looking for love, you do not listen to that. You think, okay, that's theirs. For me, I was convinced I am going to have these sparks, butterflies. And it's like almost, and we could probably psychoanalyze this and go into a whole different topic and episode on the drama addiction that I think can sometimes happen when you are a serial dater, like I for sure was. And I was addicted to that feeling of needing to be chosen, needing to have that text message, needing to have that validation and all of those things. And wow, when Ellie and I first started dating, for those first months, it was a bit like, well, yeah, I'm bored. And it was, and it was like, he's really nice. He's lovely. He's all of the things I'm looking for. And thank God for therapy, because my therapist would be like, but what's the problem? And it was 100% emotional avoidance. And this is what I've come to understand. And I'm still formulating how to say it in my head, but underneath most anxious attachment is avoidancy. Like it's just insecure attachment. It's not, it usually shows this pattern. So it's really interesting for me to hear that was also what happened to you, because it was very much a parallel experience that I had. And I questioned a lot. And I went to my friends and said, everything's great. And sometimes when everything's good, there's no drama, there's almost nothing to talk about. It smashed through this dating persona that I had of funny stories, drama, emotionally avoidant men, etc., etc. So yeah, I am such an advocate for the slow burn, and for if women feel good and calm and peaceful and settled and worry if something maybe isn't sparky enough, I always encourage to keep going. And the sparks will arrive, but just not in the way that you thought. Did you have that experience as well? Because I remember when the sparks did come later on, or not necessarily the sparks, but the excitement and that like, oh, the honeymoon phase, let's say, it was like, oh, this is actually so much worth, it was worth the wait to go through the boring chapter to be like, oh, okay, now it's getting good.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, the sparks and the chemistry and that type of stuff like did come later, but it was like without the anxiety feeling, which frankly I'd never really experienced before. But it was so great. It was like, wow, I can just love this person and know and trust that they're going to love me back, and I don't have to worry about if they're going to commit or when they're going to disappear, and we just get to be in our like lovey warm bubble. It was a really good feeling once I finally got there and kind of got over that avoidant hump, but it was really worth pushing through that.
I remember I was almost trying to create drama. Like I was trying to get something that would make my nervous system be dysregulated, because that's what I was used to in dating. So I remember we'd been seeing each other probably for a couple of months, and he was just about to fly actually to the Bay Area to go to Silicon Valley. And I remember we were having this conversation before, and I like built it up in my head, got all nervous. Is he, are we exclusive? Because it's the first time we're really, after we've been together for 2 months, we're going to be apart for 10 days and I need to bring it up. And I remember being like, so like, oh my God, I'm going to have this conversation and making it all a big deal. And what if he says no? And then it was like such an anticlimax. Like before we went, I was like, I think I said something like, "Are you still on the app? So we exclusive?" And then he was like, "Yeah, obviously we are. Like I already told everybody in work that I've got a girlfriend." And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, of course, cool, me too." Like everything was like me trying to make it bigger than it was. And then like at the end of the day, he's like, "Yeah, obviously we're together. What are you talking about?" It's just
Oh my
funny, isn't
gosh, I
it?
love that.
How this is why I love talking about the transition from dating to being in a relationship, because I don't know about you, but because love was such an enigma for me, because it was this one thing that eluded me, I had this very incorrect perception that once I found something that was for the long run, my life would be just figured out. And then I was like, oh, relationships aren't all that easy. And also my brain will still be the same brain. It's not the end point. So I love having these conversations of how it is once you go over to the other side, because I think that something that really I think it also held me back in dating was thinking how much greener the grass would be when you have a relationship. And it is greener, don't get me wrong. Having a relationship when you've been single for years and struggling to find love, when you then go into a relationship, wow, it's amazing. But it's still really difficult. And I think it's something that single women almost block themselves from thinking, because it feels easier to imagine that life will just be better in the future.
Yeah, I agree with you. I know it's, I'm like, oh, still me with my anxious brain, but now I just have someone to ruminate with. But I really agree. And another interesting thing I found about being in a relationship after all those years of dating is the slow letting down of my guard. First of all, it took a lot longer than I thought. Like I kind of thought by like a month in, I was like, I'm letting you in. I'm emotionally available. And it was confronting how I wasn't. I mean, I was somewhat, but it really took time to fully let that guard down and like be vulnerable and trust a man like truly. And he used to say like, do you just not trust me? Like, do you just hate men? And I was like, I don't, but it was really hard after all those years. So it took longer than I thought, probably like, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so to really get to where I felt like I was really safe and could trust him deeply. And that was something that was unexpected for me. And I also really was not expecting like the amount that I emotionally softened too. And I was like, I noticed myself, feeling things more, crying more. I was like, wow, I guess when you feel safe, you're able to feel these more emotions. But it was also like a lot to kind of deal with. I don't know if you felt that
Yeah.
too.
100%. And I think it actually shone a very bright spotlight on behavior from the past, especially in past relationships, where I understood that obviously because I hadn't had that safety, that I had also been emotionally avoidant. And it almost like it did make me take more responsibility for that. And often in my relationship now with Ellie, like my behavior can sometimes be avoidant and I'm the red flag. And it made me understand that when I was single, I think I did have a very strong perception that I am doing everything correct. I just haven't found the right person. And I almost knew that wasn't true, but it felt true at the time. And I think it's been exactly, I think the word that you used, humbling. It's been such a humbling experience to be with somebody who can meet me where I am and call me out and say, no, actually, you're doing this now. And also, I think you said about softening. Yeah, I did. I definitely was a bit bitter when I was, and I had maybe what was very necessary, but a harder shell on me during my single chapter, because I developed that over years of rejections and losing hope and failed relationships. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're now with somebody and they have to see all the different parts of you. And I read this, I think it's a Gillian Turecki quote, and I think it's very true about how you think you're fully healed in your single chapter because you don't have somebody else to hold a mirror back to you, because it's easier to be by yourself. And that was very true for me. And sometimes now I have it, I will be completely upfront and honest about it, that there's been often times in the last few years of my relationship where I'm like, being single was easier. It was not easier in terms of logistics and dating and all of those things. But now when you're in a relationship with somebody and you have to talk about everything, and like you said, everything, there's somebody else to ruminate with. And for me, obviously, like having a baby, having kids is also confronting time. And we did everything very, very quickly, which I know isn't most people's timelines, but wow. Like I will say, absolutely. There's times where I thought when I was in a relationship, I didn't appreciate my single chapter and how I could focus on my own healing and I could be with myself. I didn't have to take somebody else's emotions into account. So I feel like that's definitely been a big feature of finding partnership.
Yeah, it definitely is confronting and humbling. And I think that's one of the things that people tell you, like, oh, if you want to meet a man on your level, you have to kind of be ready to answer to him in certain ways and, to have him call you out or notice things about you that maybe are not so optimal about the way you do things. So I had a similar experience where it's like, lots of kind of conflict at the beginning as we're figuring out each other's styles and triggering each other. And I love that Jillian Turecki quote. I also saw it. And I really feel like you can kind of get to a point of peace when you're single and kind of, you're healing and all of that. And then when you're in a relationship, it's like you shake it all back up. And that
Wow.
was a fun journey. But it
Yeah.
also, for me, it was also really interesting to see where I had really worked to like heal my self-love and get my self-worth to a really good point when I was single. But when I got into a relationship, it like healed me a whole other level. And that was also a nice thing to realize is that there's only so much self-love can do for you when you're single. It's like you're always chasing this impossible goal of like loving myself completely. And it's sometimes true that just like being loved but securely and safely by another person like really is that last little bit that you need to like truly relax and settle. So that was a nice feeling as well.
Yeah, 100%. Just to finish off this amazing conversation, I'd love to take it back to the single listeners, because for those of you who don't follow Lauren on Instagram, you should definitely do that now. I love your takes on all these different topics. And I know that you also work with a lot of single women and maybe men as well. Actually, we never actually asked you that. But what advice would you give to somebody who is looking for something serious, struggling with dating and feeling a little bit hopeless about the dating landscape right now? What would you say to them? What message would you like them to leave this episode with in order to feel a little bit more optimistic about finding a relationship?
Just the thing that we touched on in the beginning is so important is that if you are feeling overwhelmed with all of the different advice and things that you feel like you should be doing as a single person, it's okay and maybe even preferred sometimes to tune out to all of that and really just tune into yourself and your soul and your intuition, because there's a lot less urgency and rush there and more wisdom about why your journey is happening the way it is, why it's taking so long. And I think that the answers that you can get inside are so much more relaxing and make so much more sense and give more hope, honestly, than a lot of what you see
Mm.
outside, because there's a lot that you can find on social media and friends and everything about how dating sucks. But I think that, when you tune into your intuition and that wisdom, there really is so much there. And the other side of that I think is important, and I think you actually mentioned this in a post, Emma, is the concept of expansion in dating and in manifestation, of being really careful about the stories and the media that you consume. I think that it's so important to find examples of people who like maybe were where you were and found love, or found love later in life, like in their 40s or 50s, and really just like every single day it's almost like vitamins, like reading these stories. And I know, Emma, you have an email that you go out for love after 35, so like that's exactly the perfect thing. Like really feeding your brain that type of stuff is so important. And also, not getting too caught up in all of the bad stories, because everyone gets on the internet to tell their negative dating story. It gets a lot of clicks, but I think that there really is so much hope to be had out there, and it's really important to seek it out.
Yes, obviously, I love that and could not agree more about manifestation and stories. So, thank you so much for sharing. Can you just let the listeners know where they can find out more about you?
Yes, absolutely. My main place that I post is on Instagram. My Instagram is Looking for Something Serious. It's the same title as my book, actually, Looking for Something Serious, if you want to read about my journey and just commentary on modern dating in general. And yeah, I think that's the best place.
Amazing. Well, thank you so, so much. I absolutely love this conversation. And also a huge thank you for when you came inside the Turning community to be a guest speaker. It was actually back a few months ago now. For those of you listening who want to learn more from Lauren, and I highly recommend that you do, that video is available when you go into Turning. So thank you so much for that and for sharing more wisdom with us today. And I'll see everybody on the podcast next week.